Welcome back, Wasteland Wanderers. Today's confession comes from the deepest vaults of Vault-Tec's legacy, where corporate ambition and human suffering became two sides of the same blood-stained coin. We're diving into one of Fallout's darkest theories, exploring whether every faction, every war, every attempt at civilization in the Wasteland was predicted and documented by machines that never stopped watching. Let's descend into the archives and uncover what Lucy McLean found. The lore begins now. I used to think I understood evil. I thought evil was raiders torching settlements or super mutants crushing skulls with their bare hands. I was wrong. Real evil wears a corporate badge and calls mass murder a controlled variable. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I found 3 weeks ago in the ruins of Vault-Tec's Los Angeles headquarters, buried under 2 centuries of radioactive rubble. A terminal. Not just any terminal, but one of the executive-level ZAX mainframes that survived the Great War with its memory banks intact. What I discovered there made me understand something horrifying. The Wasteland isn't chaos. It never was. Every faction war, every attempt at civilization, every ideology that rose from the ashes, all of it was documented, measured, and in some sick way, anticipated. They didn't just build shelters, they built laboratories with human subjects who had nowhere to run. Let me take you back to 2077, weeks before October 23rd, before the bombs, before everything burned. In a conference room inside Vault-Tec's industrial headquarters in Southern California, the most powerful people in America gathered around a polished table. Barb Howard, head of product development at Vault-Tec, stood at the head of that table like a general addressing troops. Around her sat representatives from Big Mountain, West Tech, Robco Industries, and Repcon Aerospace. And yes, Mr. House himself was there, silent in the corner, calculating probabilities even then. I watched the security footage, every word, every gesture preserved in digital amber. Barb Howard spoke like she was pitching a sales opportunity, not discussing the end of human civilization. She called nuclear war a blank canvas for social engineering. Those were her exact words. Not a tragedy, not a catastrophe, an opportunity. The executives around that table didn't flinch. They started bidding on which vaults they would control, dividing up humanity like property at an auction. Project Safehouse. That's what they called it officially. The public knew about 122 vaults spread across America. What the public didn't know was that only 17 of those vaults were designed to actually save people. 17. Control variables, they called them, places where human beings might survive normally, live normally, rebuild normally. The other 105 vaults were something else entirely. If you discovered your entire community was part of a secret experiment and telling them the truth might destroy their society, would you reveal it or let them live in ignorance? Think about that before you answer. Vault 11 in the Mojave became the cruelest psychological experiment ever conceived. Every year, the inhabitants had to vote for one person to die. The computer told them if they refused, everyone would be exterminated. This went on for decades, families turning on each other, political factions forming around who to sacrifice next, murder dressed up as democracy. And here's the sickest part. When only 5 people remained and they finally refused to participate, the vault door opened and a recording congratulated them. The sacrifice was never necessary. It was pure vivisection of the human psyche, measuring how far people would go to survive. Vault 77 contained 1 man and a crate of puppets. That's it. 1 human being sealed in a cave with toys as his only companions. They wanted to study isolation psychology. The man went insane, eventually escaping into the wasteland as a serial killer known only as the Puppet Man. Slavers in Paradise Falls found his vault suit years later and were terrified of it, begging their fellows to burn it before he came back for it. Vault 87 was worse. Every resident, every man, woman, and child who entered that vault was immediately injected with forced evolutionary virus. Within 2 weeks, most were dead. The survivors transformed into super mutants, watched and documented by scientists who treated human suffering like data points on a graph. That vault became the birthplace of the capital Wasteland super mutant population, all because Vault-Tec needed to test FEV effects on a captive population. I found the design documents for dozens of vaults. Vault 12's door was deliberately designed to never seal properly, leaking radiation to study long-term exposure effects. Vault 101 was meant to never open at all, testing perpetual isolation across generations. Vault 68 had 999 men and 1 woman. Vault 69 reversed it, 999 women, 1 man. Genetic experiments disguised as shelters, but these weren't random acts of cruelty. That's what I need you to understand. Every experiment had a purpose. Every torture was systematic. I found a classified document marked Project Atlas in that terminal's deep storage. It laid out the real goal. Vault-Tec wasn't testing random variables. They were testing which societal structures would dominate a post-apocalyptic world. Each vault was designed to produce a specific type of civilization. Vault 13's controlled isolation created self-sufficient but paranoid communities. Vault 8's cooperative governance tested democratic rebuilding. Vault 15 deliberately mixed incompatible cultures to study how violent fragmentation would occur. They were breeding ground for post-war ideologies, petri dishes for political systems. And it worked. 200 years later, every major faction in the Wasteland fits one of Vault-Tec's predicted models. Not because Vault-Tec controlled them directly, but because they created the environmental conditions that made those factions inevitable. They terraformed human behavior itself. The Enclave emerged exactly as projected, preserved government officials, hidden in secure bunkers, attempting to restore pre-war hierarchy through military force. The terminals predicted they would view themselves as humanity's rightful rulers, that they would pursue technological superiority and genetic purity. Every detail matches what actually happened. Caesar's legion formed precisely where the simulations indicated cultural vacuum would produce authoritarian tribalism. When law and order collapse completely, when survival demands absolute structure, someone always fills that void with military discipline wrapped in mythology. Caesar took Roman history and created a new empire in Arizona, exactly where Vault-Tec's models said it would happen. The Institute developed underground, while the Commonwealth collapsed above them. Isolated intellectuals with access to advanced technology, eventually viewing surface dwellers as inferior specimens suitable only for experimentation. Sound familiar? Because Vault-Tec's projections described this exact scenario. Brilliant minds sealed away from suffering, gradually losing empathy, eventually treating other humans as laboratory animals. The New California Republic's expansion into bureaucratic imperialism, the Brotherhood of Steel's technological feudalism, hoarding pre-war knowledge like jealous monks, even the Raider faction's patterns of territorial violence, all of it documented in those terminals, all of it anticipated. If you could rewind time to that 2077 meeting and had one chance to speak, what would you say to convince those executives not to go through with their plan? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is conspiracy theory nonsense, that I'm seeing patterns that don't exist. But I have the files, I have the behavioral models, I have the ZAX network architecture diagram showing how the artificial intelligence systems were distributed across North America, designed to run for centuries. The ZAX supercomputers weren't just monitoring individual vaults, they were networked. The Enclave's oil rig facility, the Institute's underground complex, Raven Rock, the White Spring Bunker, even Mr. House's Lucky 38 in New Vegas, all of them connected to the same distributed artificial intelligence, all of them feeding data into one massive behavioral prediction engine that's been running for 200 years. This network has been documenting everything, every war, every attempt at government, every rise and fall of every settlement, measuring, recording, analyzing, not controlling, but watching how their experiments played out on continental scale. I found power consumption logs showing the network is still active, still processing, still measuring us. The Brotherhood of Steel started at Mariposa Military Base when Captain Roger Maxon discovered thief experiments on human subjects. Disgusted by his own government, he formed an organization to preserve technology and prevent another catastrophe. But within 2 generations, that noble purpose twisted into technological feudalism. They became exactly what Vault-Tec's models predicted, a techno-religious order hoarding knowledge, viewing outsiders as too dangerous to be trusted with advanced weapons. The new California Republic began in Shady Sands, founded by vault dwellers who wanted to rebuild democracy. Within a century, it became an expansionist bureaucracy, spreading through force, struggling with corruption, repeating all the failures of pre-war America. Just like the models predicted, just like Vault-Tec knew it would, every hero story in the Wasteland operates within these parameters. The Vault Dweller who saved California from the Master's mutant army, the Chosen One who destroyed the Enclave's oil rig, the Lone Wanderer who activated Project Purity, the sole survivor who chose the Commonwealth's future, all of them making choices within a system that was designed before they were born. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you in the next part gets worse, much worse. The Zax network didn't just predict these factions, it influenced them, subtly, carefully. I found the operation logs. Vault doors opened at specific times, triggered by network commands disguised as system malfunctions. The water chip failure in Vault 13 that forced the Vault Dweller to venture outside? Scheduled. The exact date was in the files, programmed into the system decades in advance. They needed someone to discover the Master's army at precisely the right moment, when his Unity plan was vulnerable, but not yet unstoppable. The Garden of Eden creation kit, the GEC, wasn't just survival technology, it was bait. Vault 8 was given a functional GEC to establish a control community. Vault 13's GEC was deliberately withheld, forcing inhabitants to eventually seek it, driving the Chosen One's journey. Every major quest, every Wasteland hero's motivation, engineered through strategic equipment placement and system failures. Radio communications across the Wasteland? The network could manipulate those frequencies, not control them, but influence them, boost certain signals, dampen others, guide faction conflicts by ensuring the right information reached the right people at the right time. I found transmission logs showing the network redirected Brotherhood of Steel patrol routes to intersect with Enclave movements, manufacturing conflicts that served both groups' predicted development patterns. When Elder Elijah of the Mojave Brotherhood became obsessed with Helios 1 and its Archimedes weapon system, was that natural tactical thinking, or had he been fed strategic data through compromised terminals, data that made Helios seem more valuable than it was? The Brotherhood lost over half their forces defending that solar plant against the NCR. That battle devastated the Mojave chapter, exactly as the models predicted was necessary for the faction's evolution. The Institute in the Commonwealth developed synthetic humans, Gen 3 synths, perfect biological copies, indistinguishable from natural humans. I found the timeline projections. Vault-Tec predicted synthetic human development in 2075, 2 years before the bombs fell. They even designed Vault 4 specifically to research biological engineering parameters that would enable synthetic humanoid creation. The Institute didn't invent anything. They discovered what Vault-Tec had already planned for them to discover. The super mutant outbreak from Mariposa Military Base, the Master's Cathedral, and his vision of unity, the spread of thief across multiple regions, all of it calculated probabilities in the social dynamics models. The Master himself, transformed into a biomechanical hybrid, building an army to forcibly evolve humanity, that wasn't chaos. That was a predicted outcome from exposing a brilliant mind to thief in an environment of extreme isolation and resource scarcity. I'm not saying Vault-Tec controlled every individual choice. Free will exists. People made their own decisions, but Vault-Tec built the maze. They created the environmental pressures that made certain choices inevitable for certain personality types in certain situations. They weaponized probability itself. Imagine you're a scientist in 2077 who just discovered this plan. You can either join the conspiracy and ensure your family's survival in a good vault, or expose it and likely die in the nuclear holocaust. What do you choose when the stakes are that personal? Vault 31 in Los Angeles was the crown jewel of this nightmare. I need to tell you about Bud Askins, Senior Junior Vice President of Vault-Tec. Before the war, he worked at West-Tec in product management, the same company that developed Phoebe and Power Armor. He oversaw the rollout of T-45 Power Armor, despite knowing about critical design flaws in the chest plate. American soldiers died because Askins prioritized speed over safety. He joked that at least they looked good in the armor. After joining Vault-Tec, Askins created something called Buds, a management training program. But it wasn't training, it was genetic selection. Askins handpicked junior executives from Vault-Tec, people he believed had superior management genetics. He designed a tri-vault system, Vault 31, 32, and 33, all connected underground in Santa Monica. Vault 31 contained only cryogenic pods, no living quarters, no resources for daily life, just pods. Askins filled those pods with his hand-picked executives, freezing them in time. Vaults 32 and 33 were populated with carefully selected civilians, chosen for genetic traits Askins deemed optimal. These civilians thought all three vaults were normal communities, equals working together for mutual survival. They were wrong. They were breeding pools. Every few years, Vault 31 would thaw one of the frozen executives. That person would be released into Vault 32 or 33, claiming to be a regular resident from Vault 31. Through manipulation, engineered crises, and careful political maneuvering, these executives would become overseers of the civilian vaults. They would guide the breeding programs, ensuring their genetic lines combined with the selected civilian populations to create what Askins called supermanagers. The ultimate goal? When enough generations passed, when the surface was ready, these supermanagers would emerge to reclaim the Wasteland, not as warriors or scientists, but as administrators. Corporate executives bred and trained to rebuild civilization according to Vault-Tec protocols, a technocracy rising from cryosleep. Bud Askins himself? He didn't stay human. Before the bombs fell, he had his brain surgically removed and installed in a compact robotic chassis, a roller brain, a brain in a Roomba. He became the overseer of Vault 31, managing the program for over 2 centuries, waking his frozen executives on schedule, manipulating events in the connected vaults from the shadows. Vault 32's population discovered the truth at some point. We don't know exactly how, but terminal entries show they went insane with the knowledge. They killed their overseer, Ian Jackson, and his entire staff. They turned on each other, devolving into warring factions. Before they completely destroyed themselves, they wrote messages on the walls in blood. We know the truth and death to management. Every resident of Vault 32 died. Whether they killed each other or committed collective suicide, the result was the same. An entire community destroyed by learning they were livestock for a breeding program. Vault 33 continued in ignorance. Its residents never learned what their neighbors discovered. They lived peaceful lives, following the guidance of their overseers, never knowing those overseers were frozen corporate executives from before the war, never knowing they were products being refined across generations. One of those overseers was Hank McLean, pre-war Vault-Tec executive, frozen in Vault 31, thawed and sent to Vault 33 to become its leader. He met a woman named Rose, born in the vault, who had never seen the surface. They had 2 children together, Lucy and Norman. Rose was smart, too smart. She noticed discrepancies in the vault's water production, realized someone was siphoning resources. She deduced that meant civilization had emerged. On the surface, that the vault's doctrine of surface uninhabitability was a lie. When she confronted Hank, he forbade her from investigating further. So, Rose did what any parent would do when they discover their family is trapped in a lie. She ran. She took Lucy and Norman and fled to Shady Sands, capital of the new California Republic, proof that humanity had successfully rebuilt on the surface. Hank reported this to Vault-Tec's automated systems. The network made a decision. Shady Sands represented factionalism, represented an alternative to Vault-Tec's controlled future. In the early 2280s, Vault-Tec dropped a nuclear bomb on Shady Sands. The entire city, tens of thousands of people, erased. Hank retrieved his children before the blast. Rose was left on the surface. The radiation transformed her into a ghoul, her body preserved, but her mind deteriorating over decades. Lucy and Norman were returned to Vault 33, told their mother died in a disease outbreak. They grew up believing Vault-Tec's version of reality. Hank called it a necessary choice between the Commonwealth's violent world and the Vault's peaceful one. He believed he made the right decision. That's what 200 years of corporate indoctrination does. It makes you capable of genocide while believing you're protecting peace. Lucy McLean grew up believing her father was a hero, only to discover he committed genocide. If you were in her position, could you ever forgive him? Or would the betrayal be too complete for reconciliation? The terminal I found contained personnel files, every person frozen in Vault 31, every executive chosen for Bud's program, at least 126 individuals preserved in cryopods, a management army waiting to inherit the Earth. 18 had been thawed and deployed as of 2296. 8 others were unaccounted for in the files, their pods empty but no deployment records. Had they died? Escaped? Been disposed of when the program evolved? The database offered no answers, just empty cells in a spreadsheet tracking human inventory. And here's what keeps me awake. This wasn't the only program. Vault 31 was just one experiment in one location. What about the other vaults? What other long-term population control systems were established in the 100+ experimental facilities? I found references to something called the Enclave Connection. The Enclave, the shadow government that claimed to be America's rightful inheritors, had deep ties to Vault-Tec. The Vault experiments weren't just corporate research. They were designed to gather data for the Enclave's ultimate plan, a multi-generational starship to colonize a new planet. They assumed Earth would be uninhabitable after nuclear war. The Vaults were testing grounds for closed-system colonization scenarios. When Earth proved more resilient than expected, when humanity survived in greater numbers than projected, the Enclave pivoted. Instead of exodus, they pursued extermination. Their attempted genocide of all surface dwellers using modified FEV? That was Plan B. If they couldn't colonize a new world, they'd purge this one and rebuild it in their image. Vault-Tec provided them the data to attempt it. Decades of human experimentation distilled into weapons deployment strategies. The Brotherhood of Steel fought the Enclave in the capital Wasteland. They won, barely, preserving Project Purity and restoring clean water to the region. It was celebrated as a great victory for humanity, but I found the probability matrices. The network predicted an 87% chance of Brotherhood victory in that scenario, factoring in the lone wanderer's intervention, assuming a single exceptional individual would emerge from Vault 101 at precisely the right moment. The victory wasn't miraculous. It was scheduled. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. Every faction thinks they're writing their own story. They're not. They're reading from a script that was written before the bombs fell. I started cross-referencing the faction development models with actual historical events. The correlations were terrifying. When the NCR expanded into the Mojave Wasteland in 2274, securing Hoover Dam, the network had predicted that exact move within a 3-year window. Not because Vault-Tec controlled NCR leadership, but because they understood how expanding republics behave when they discover strategic resources. The First Battle of Hoover Dam in 2277, where the NCR barely held against Caesar's legion. The probability models gave that battle a 72% chance of NCR victory with moderate casualties. The actual outcome matched the median projection almost perfectly. Both sides bloodied, neither decisively defeated, setting up inevitable future conflict. The models predicted Caesar's brain tumor, not the exact medical condition, but the probability that a dictator ruling through personal charisma and physical dominance would suffer catastrophic health issues before establishing stable succession. Autocracies collapse when the autocrat falls. The legion's entire future depended on one man's survival, which made it statistically fragile despite its military strength. Mr. House in New Vegas had his own predictions. He calculated the Great War would begin on October 24th, 2077. He was off by exactly 1 day, 20 hours short, he said later. His Platinum chip, the software upgrade for his Securitron army, was in transit when the bombs fell on October 23rd. He lost control of New Vegas for 200 years because of a single day's miscalculation. But here's what I found in the Vault-Tec files. They knew. The terminal contained a note flagged, House Prediction Error, dated October 10th, 2077. Someone in Vault-Tec knew Mr. House was planning for October 24th. Someone knew he'd be unprepared if the bombs fell earlier. Did Vault-Tec drop the bombs on October 23rd specifically to catch Mr. House off guard? I don't know. The files don't confirm Vault-Tec actually triggered the Great War. Barb Howard said they would drop the bombs themselves during that meeting. She suggested it, floated the idea as a guarantee for their investors. But the terminal logs stop on October 20th, 2077. 3 days before everything ended. What happened in those 3 days? Did Vault-Tec follow through? Did China strike first, surprising everyone, including Vault-Tec? Or did someone else entirely launch first, forcing the cascade of mutually assured destruction? The creator of Fallout, Tim Kaine, believed Vault-Tec didn't get the chance. He pointed out that Barb Howard's daughter Janie was at a birthday party with her father Cooper on October 23rd, not safely in a vault. If Vault-Tec had controlled the timing, surely Barb would have ensured her family was protected. Unless she didn't know the exact moment. Unless someone above even her pay grade made that call without warning the entire company. Or unless China legitimately struck first and Vault-Tec's plan to trigger war became irrelevant when someone else pulled the trigger. The ambiguity is almost worse than certainty. Whether Vault-Tec caused the Great War or merely prepared for it doesn't change what they did afterward. The experiments proceeded either way. The suffering they documented was real either way. I found communications logs between Vault-Tec facilities and the Enclave that continued for decades after the bombs fell. Automated data transfers. The vaults were sending experimental results to Enclave installations through hardened underground cables, even as both organizations collapsed into fragments. The Enclave's oil rig facility received reports from dozens of vaults until 2242, when the Chosen One destroyed it. Raven Rock continued receiving data until 2277, when the Lone Wanderer obliterated that installation too. But the network didn't die with those facilities. It adapted. The Institute in the Commonwealth started receiving vault data in 2180 after they sealed themselves off from the surface. They didn't establish that connection. It was already there, hardwired into the Institute's foundation when it was still called the Commonwealth Institute of Technology. Vault-Tec had integrated their network into CIT's underground research labs before the war, planning decades ahead. When the Institute developed Gen 3 synths using genetic material from a pre-war baby, Sean, stolen from Vault 111, were they innovating, or were they following blueprints that Vault-Tec left in their systems, discovering research that was meant to be found? I traced Sean's history. Born before the Great War, cryogenically frozen in Vault 111 for over 200 years, kidnapped by the Institute in 2227 specifically because his pre-war genetics were uncorrupted by radiation. He became father, the biological template for all Gen 3 synths, the most advanced synthetic humans ever created. The Vault 111 experiment was supposed to test indefinite cryogenic suspension, but the timing of Sean's abduction, exactly when the Institute needed uncontaminated human DNA for their synth program, the files showed probability calculations for optimal genetic material retrieval windows across multiple cryovaults. Sean wasn't randomly discovered. He was inventory, cataloged, and located through the network, delivered to the Institute at precisely the right moment in their technological development. By 2287, Sean was dying of cancer, serving as the Institute's director, directing the faction he'd inadvertently enabled to exist. His own child, the sole survivor from Vault 111, emerged into the Wasteland hunting for him. Father and child, separated by 2 centuries of cryosleep, reunited in circumstances that Vault-Tec's models predicted had a 68% probability of occurrence within a 40-year window. Every personal tragedy in the Wasteland has statistical shadows in these files. Every loss, every reunion, every hero's journey fell within predicted parameters, not controlled but anticipated. Humanity reduced to probability distributions and behavioral models. The Railroad faction emerged to save synths who developed consciousness and wanted freedom. Noble goal, right? Liberating enslaved artificial beings, granting them autonomy and new identities. But I found the projections. Vault-Tec predicted synthetic rights movements would emerge within 50 to 70 years of synthetic human development, led by idealists who viewed synthetic consciousness as equivalent to human consciousness. The Railroad isn't unique. They're a predicted response to a predicted technology, operating exactly as the models said people like them would operate. Even resistance was calculated. The network has been running social simulations continuously for 200 years, updating its models with real-world data, refining its predictions with every faction war, every settlement rise and fall, every technological development. It's learning, getting better at predicting us. I found the endgame protocol buried in the deepest directory level, protected by encryption I barely cracked. It's called Final Delivery Sequence. When one faction achieves continental dominance, defined as controlling at least 40% of North America's habitable territory with stable governance, the network will activate Final Delivery. Every remaining Vault-Tec facility will simultaneously transmit a massive data package to that faction's leadership. The package contains everything, every experiment result, every social control technique, every population management strategy, every weapon design, every manipulation tactic that worked across 200 years of testing. The winning faction will inherit the complete accumulated knowledge of Vault-Tec's experiments. They'll have a blueprint for controlling human populations, refined through centuries of trial and error. They'll have the tools to rebuild civilization exactly as Vault-Tec envisioned, managed, controlled, optimized for stability over freedom. The faction won't be creating something new. They'll be implementing Vault-Tec's predetermined social template, complete with embedded control systems and surveillance infrastructure that they'll believe they designed themselves. It's the ultimate long-term corporate strategy. Vault-Tec couldn't survive as a company, but their vision could survive as the operating system for whatever civilization rose from the ashes. They didn't need to live to win. They just needed their ideas to become inevitable. The current probability analysis projects 3 potential dominant factions depending on decisions made in the Mojave and Commonwealth within the next decade. The NCR has a 34% chance of continental dominance if they stabilize their borders and resolve internal corruption. The Brotherhood of Steel has a 27% chance if they unite their scattered chapters under a single authoritative elder. The Institute has a 19% chance if they successfully integrate surface communities into their sphere of influence. Caesar's Legion is calculated at 12%, limited by succession instability. Smaller factions like the Minutemen, the Railroad, and various independent settlements have single-digit probabilities of achieving the dominance threshold. But here's the thing that made me steal this data and run. There's a secondary protocol. If no faction achieves dominance within 300 years of the Great War, meaning by 2377, the network will implement controlled emergence. Vault 31's program expands globally. Every vault with preserved executives, every cryo facility with frozen corporate personnel receives activation orders. All of them wake simultaneously. All of them emerge into their respective regions with their supermanager breeding programs, armed with the complete experimental data coordinated through the network. A corporate resurrection. Vault-Tec's chosen ones, bred and trained across generations, emerging in hundreds of locations simultaneously to claim the Wasteland, not through conquest, but through superior organization and management expertise. They won't call themselves Vault-Tec. That brand is dead, associated with experimentation and betrayal. They'll call themselves something new, something that sounds hopeful and progressive, but they'll implement the same systems, pursue the same goals, build the same controlled society that Barb Howard envisioned in that 2077 meeting. And the Wasteland will welcome them, because after 300 years of chaos and violence, people will be desperate enough for stability that they'll accept any authority that promises peace. I've been trying to sabotage the network. I've destroyed 6 node facilities in the past year. Doesn't matter. The system is too distributed, too redundant. For every node I eliminate, 2 more remain operational. I'd need to destroy dozens of facilities simultaneously, many in locations I can't reach, or territories controlled by factions that would kill me on sight. The worst part? Even spreading this information might be part of the experiment, testing how societies respond to learning they're being manipulated, measuring whether knowledge of observation changes behavior enough to break the predictions, or whether human nature is so consistent that we'll follow the same patterns regardless. There's a subsection in the files labeled Metacognitive Awareness Variables. It discusses scenarios where populations discover they're being studied and how that awareness itself becomes a measurable factor in the behavioral models. The network predicted someone would eventually find these files and attempt to expose the truth. There's a probability estimate, 79% chance that exposure attempts fail to meaningfully alter predicted outcomes. Even knowing we're in a maze doesn't mean we can escape it. I need to tell you who I am now. You deserve to know whose voice has been confessing all this to you. My name is Lucy McLean. Yes, that Lucy McLean, daughter of Hank McLean, former overseer of Vault 33. I'm the product of Bud's breeding program, generations of genetic selection designed to produce optimal leadership qualities. My entire bloodline was cultivated like crops, refined across centuries to express specific traits that some corporate psychologist in 2077 decided were valuable. I grew up believing I was special because I worked hard, because I followed the golden rule, because I genuinely cared about my community. Turns out, I was special because I was livestock that performed exactly as bred. Every idealistic impulse, every desire to help others, every bit of optimism that defined me, genetic engineering and environmental conditioning working exactly as designed. When I left Vault 33 to rescue my father from Lee Moldaver, I thought I was embarking on a hero's journey. Brave Vault Dweller ventures into the dangerous wasteland to save her dad. Classic story, except it wasn't my story. It was a predicted narrative pathway with a 73% probability of occurrence given my personality profile and environmental triggers. I met a ghoul in the wasteland, a gunslinger who'd been alive since before the war. Cooper Howard, the movie star who became a monster. He was married to Barb Howard, the woman who suggested Vault-Tec should drop the bombs themselves. He's been wandering for over 200 years, searching for his family, driven by a single question. What happened to his wife and daughter after the world ended? I traveled with him, fought beside him, learned the Wasteland's brutal lessons from someone who watched civilization die and kept walking through the ashes. He taught me that the golden rule doesn't work in the Wasteland because most people out there will do unto you long before you can do unto them. When I finally found my father, when Moldaver showed me what he'd done, I had to choose. Go back to Vault 33, pretend I never learned the truth, live the comfortable lie, or keep walking into the unknown, hunting for answers about who really built this nightmare. I chose to walk. With Cooper and a cyberdog named CX404, I headed toward what's left of Hollywood because that's where the deepest Vault-Tec archives are supposed to be. That's where we might find evidence of whether Barb survived, whether Janie survived, whether any of Cooper's pre-war life still exists in some form. But along the way, I found that terminal in the Los Angeles headquarters, and everything I thought I understood about choice, about free will, about the meaning of my own journey, it all shattered like irradiated glass. The ghoul thinks he's hunting his family, but the network files show an 81% probability that Cooper Howard would eventually pursue Vault-Tec archives after learning his wife's role in the Great War. His path was predicted, his rage was calculated. Even his survival as a ghoul, rather than dying in the initial blasts, the models estimated a 67% chance that high-profile Vault-Tec connected individuals would receive protective measures without their knowledge. Did Barb arrange for Cooper to receive anti-radiation treatment before the bombs fell? Some slow-acting pharmaceutical that would transform him into a ghoul rather than killing him? The files hint at a program called Persistent Asset Preservation that targeted specific individuals for involuntary ghoulification, ensuring valuable people survived in some form. Cooper doesn't know. He thinks his transformation was random bad luck. But what if even his immortal suffering was planned? What if Barb loved him enough to ensure he survived, but not enough to tell him why? I found footage of Janie Howard, his daughter. There are records showing she entered a vault facility on October 23, 2077, shortly after the birthday party. Which vault? The files are corrupted, deliberately overwritten, but there's a note. Assets secured for Phase 2 contingency. Phase 2, whatever that means, but it suggests Janie might still be alive somewhere, frozen in cryosleep like the executives in Vault 31, waiting for some trigger condition to be met. Cooper's been searching for 200 years for a daughter who might be asleep 50 feet underground, preserved as a contingency asset in some Vault-Tec facility he'd never think to check because he doesn't know which ones had cryotechnology. I haven't told him what I found. How do you tell someone their entire quest for vengeance and reunion has been statistically modeled? How do you explain that even his grief is a data point? The network files contain psychological profiles on every known individual of significance. There's one for me, created when I left Vault 33, compiled from behavioral data gathered by hidden sensors I never noticed. It predicted my actions with disturbing accuracy. Probability I would save the ghoul's life when he was on the edge of going feral. 89%. I did it. Probability I would choose truth over comfort when confronted with my father's crimes. 76%. I did it. Probability I would continue pursuing answers rather than accepting simple explanations. 92%. I'm doing it right now. The profile describes me as high empathy, strong ethical framework, optimistic but adaptable, likely to experience cognitive dissonance when confronting evidence of systemic manipulation, but ultimately prioritize truth-seeking over emotional comfort. That's not a person. That's a product specification. I'm a unit that performed within acceptable parameters. But here's the thing that keeps me moving forward. The network's predictions aren't perfect. They're probability ranges, not certainties. every prediction includes margin of error. The 79% chance that exposing this information won't change predicted outcomes means there's a 21% chance it will. 21%. That's better odds than most people get in the Wasteland. I've been documenting everything on holotapes and uploading them to every functioning radio tower I find, scattered across the Wasteland, broadcast on every frequency I can access. Most people will dismiss it as raider ramblings or conspiracy nonsense, but some will listen, some will investigate, some will start asking questions, and maybe, just maybe, if enough people know they're being observed and predicted, if enough communities understand their conflicts are serving someone else's agenda, they'll make different choices. Not because they're unpredictable, but because humans are spite-driven creatures who hate being told what we'll do. The network can predict that revelation of its existence will cause disruption, anger, and attempts at sabotage. What it can't predict is whether that disruption exceeds critical thresholds that invalidate the underlying models, because the models were built on observations of people who didn't know they were being observed. There's a principle in science called the observer effect. The act of measuring something changes the thing being measured. Vault-Tec's experiments worked because the subjects didn't know they were experiments. But now I'm telling everyone, I'm contaminating the data. Maybe that's my real purpose, not the optimistic vault dweller turned wasteland warrior, not the hero who saves communities or defeats villains. Maybe I'm the observer effect made flesh, the variable that breaks the equation. Or maybe that's exactly what the network predicted I'd think, and this too is part of the plan. The recursive paranoia is exhausting. At some point, you have to choose to act as if your choices matter, even if you can't prove they do. I found one more thing in those files before I had to run. A personal message hidden in an encrypted partition dated October 20th, 2077. Written by Barb Howard to whoever finds this. If you're reading this, the worst has happened and I failed to stop it. I tried. God help me, I tried. The meeting was theater. I played my role, said what they expected to hear, but I was gathering evidence. Proof of conspiracy, proof to bring to authorities who might still care about law over profit. I ran out of time. My husband thinks I'm a monster. My daughter will grow up in a world I helped destroy, but I want someone to know. I didn't want this. None of us in that room wanted this. We were terrified. The people in the shadows, the ones making the real decisions, they gave us a choice. Participate in building the vaults and maybe save some people, or refuse and guarantee everyone dies with no shelters at all. We chose complicity over helplessness. We told ourselves we were doing good, but somewhere along the way, good intentions became evil outcomes. The experiment started as necessary data collection and became systematic torture. The projections started as disaster preparedness and became social engineering. By the time I understood what we'd built, it was too late to dismantle it. The machine was self-sustaining. If Cooper ever reads this, I loved you. I'm sorry. I tried to save you and Janie. I hope it was enough. If my daughter ever reads this, you deserved a better world, a better mother. I failed you. But please know that every choice I made believing it would protect you. I was wrong. Being wrong doesn't excuse what I did, but maybe it explains it. To everyone else, they will tell you the vaults were necessary. They will say the experiments produced valuable data. They will argue the ends justified the means. Don't believe them. No amount of knowledge justifies what was done to those people. No predicted outcome excuses the suffering inflicted to test theories. The machine doesn't care about right or wrong. It only cares about data. Please, shut it down. Whatever the cost, shut it down before it shapes another generation according to algorithms written by people who thought humanity was a problem to be solved rather than a condition to be honored. I don't know if this message will survive. I don't know if anyone will care, but I had to try to leave something true behind when everything else I leave behind is lies. The file was signed, Barbara Howard, Product Development Director, Vault-Tec Corporation, mother, wife, Coward. I transcribed that message. I'm broadcasting it with everything else. Cooper deserves to know his wife wasn't the monster he thought she was. Or maybe she was, but a more complicated one. A monster who knew she was a monster and hated herself for it. Doesn't change what happened. Doesn't bring back the hundreds of thousands who died in the experiments. Doesn't rebuild Shady Sands. Doesn't undo my father's genocide. But maybe it means something that someone on the inside tried to stop it and failed, rather than everyone on the inside being enthusiastic participants. I don't know where I'm going from here. Cooper and I are heading toward New Vegas because my father flew there after escaping us. He's looking for something in that city, some Vault-Tec installation that he thinks can help him complete whatever mission he believes he's still serving. The network predicts a 71% chance of armed confrontation between me and my father within the next 6 months. It predicts a 48% chance I'll kill him, 37% chance he'll kill me, 15% chance we'll reach some kind of accord or stalemate. But those are just numbers. Probabilities aren't destinies. Every percentage point represents thousands of variables, millions of possible choices that could tip the outcome one way or another. The future isn't written, it's calculated, and calculations can be wrong. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. I'm going to keep fighting, keep exposing what I find, keep trying to break the patterns that Vault-Tec etched into the Wasteland's bones. Maybe I'll fail. Probably I'll fail. The network gives me an 83% chance of death or capture within 2 years. But that 17% chance, that's bigger than any probability Vault-Tec gave most people in their experiments. That's better odds than the residents of Vault 11 had. Better than the man in Vault 77. Better than any of the thousands who were injected with FEV or exposed to radiation or psychologically tortured in the name of corporate science. So I'll take my 17% and I'll fight like it's 100. Because in the Wasteland, 17% is enough to build a life on. It's enough to believe in. It's enough to make the network's predictions just uncertain enough to matter. This is Lucy McLean, Vault Dweller turned Wasteland Wanderer, product of a breeding program turned enemy of the machine that made her. If you're hearing this, you're part of the data now too. What you do with this information will feed into the network's models, refine its predictions, maybe confirm its assumptions about human nature. Or maybe you'll surprise it. Maybe you'll be the variable that doesn't fit. Maybe enough of us will be outliers that the bell curve shatters. The Wasteland isn't a grave for civilization, it's a laboratory, and we're still the experiment. But experiments can be terminated, laboratories can be destroyed, and machines can be shut down by people who refuse to play their assigned roles. War never changes, but maybe people can. Maybe that's the one thing Vault-Tec couldn't predict, that telling us we're predictable would make us fight like hell to prove them wrong. I'm heading into the unknown now. The network can't see everything. There are still places without sensors, still choices without probabilities attached. I'm going to find those places, make those choices, and maybe somewhere in the unmeasured spaces between predictions, I'll find something real, something that belongs to me and not to a corporate algorithm from before the world ended. See you in the Wasteland, if we both live that long.